Hello, and thank you for watching. My name is Bradford Roberts, Principal Broker, Founder, and Owner of TR Realty in the Las Vegas area. After watching this video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel. Download the pertinent handouts for this video by clicking the link in the comments below. Now let's get started. This video is entitled Class 2 Real Estate Behind the Scenes. This segment is entitled Home Inspections. I recommend Home Pride Inspections. Home Pride has been a partner of TR Realty for roughly a decade. They do an absolutely fantastic job, and our associates are very, very happy with the way they do home inspections. What exactly does a home inspection company do? So first of all, they conduct inspections on an a la carte kind of pick and choose basis. So years ago, there was something called a home inspection. You could call a home inspection company, you'd order a home inspection, and that was that simple. However, home inspection companies over the years have really become a la carte, meaning that whoever orders the home inspection can make a decision which services, which features they would like inspected. So home inspection companies can do things like look for moisture inside walls. They can actually inspect driveways and sidewalks and cinder block walls and fences. They can inspect pools. They often go up into the attic or down into a crawl space if there is one. Of course, they cannot do any destructive inspections, right? They can't rip up the carpeting. They can't poke a hole in the wall. So they do what's called non-invasive inspections. Home inspection companies also, very importantly, prepare the home inspection report. And as you're going to hear in subsequent class videos, the inspection report will enable the buyer to do a few things. One is to know the condition of the property that they are considering purchasing. Another is to give them a chance to go back to the negotiating table and talk to the seller about possibly doing some repairs before close of escrow, or maybe getting a credit, or maybe lowering the price of the property depending on what's contained in that inspection report. Now, if you go out and hire some mom and pop inspection company, you can actually run into a situation where the inspection is performed on a given day, but then after that, it takes several days for the home inspection report to be prepared and provided. And what can happen in that case is you can actually burn your due diligence period, the period of time during which the buyer would have to renegotiate or cancel the transaction based on that inspection report. So we want a company like Home Pride that can generate that inspection report as quickly as possible after conducting that home inspection. Another thing that home inspection companies do, certainly Home Pride will do, is to answer any questions you or your customers may have regarding construction and permits. Now, when it comes to construction, some people in real estate may have a construction background or may have knowledge of construction, but that needs to remain off to the side. We cannot wear that second hat in a transaction. And any advice that we need about construction, what is the difference between an asphalt roof and a composite shingle roof, as an example, those kinds of things, we can't answer even if we think we know the answer. We need to let the home inspection company handle that. And I mentioned permits, so a lot of people automatically assume that when a piece of property changes hands, that the permit issues have to be resolved, have to be cleared up. That is not true at all. If we are not careful, a property can absolutely convey from a seller to a buyer, even when work was done with no permit or with an unclosed permit on the property. So if there are any questions about permitting whatsoever, they should be directed to the home inspector who has a lot of knowledge. Another thing that home inspection companies can do is known as a re-inspection. So a lot of times in a real estate transaction, a buyer hires a home inspector. The home inspector provides a report. The buyer goes back to the seller and says, I'd like you to do this repair, etc. But how do we know those repairs were really done or done properly? Well, the buyer does get a walkthrough immediately prior to close of escrow, but does the buyer really know what to look for? What if it's something like roof shingling, as an example, that needed to be repaired? Just because the seller says, yeah, I fixed those roof shingles, or even if he could produce some kind of an invoice, how do we know it's real? How do we know it's not his cousin's roofing company? Is the buyer really going to climb on the roof the day before close of escrow? It's not going to happen, right? So home inspectors can be brought back to do re-inspections. And when we use the term re-inspection, we're talking about a situation where the primary inspection has already been conducted on the property, and now that inspector is coming back for the second time to check on some things like repairs that may have been done. Never hire the inspector yourself. If you are a real estate agent, you can get in a lot of trouble by ordering that home inspection. And that goes back to something I said at the beginning of this video, which is that home inspection companies have really become a la carte. So if you're a real estate agent and you opt to hire the home inspector yourself, you would have to make the decisions on what's going to be done. Are they going to check air quality, as an example? Are they going to check for radon gas? What about lead-based paint? Are they going to check for mold? If so, will that mold be sent to a laboratory to determine if it's toxic? And myriad other miscellaneous and a la carte services. So real estate agents should never hire the inspector themselves. Let the buyer choose the services and hire the inspection company that he wants. Now, one thing you can do as a real estate agent is to make sure that all of the utilities are connected before you schedule that home inspector to visit that property. If the water is off, the gas is off, the electricity is off, as an example, we can't do a proper inspection. And that's going to put a lot of liability on the table for everyone involved, including the agents. So make sure that the utilities are on. That way, the inspector has full access to all the features of the property. And don't be surprised if you are negligent in that regard and you allow the home inspector to visit the property not knowing if the utilities are on. If one of the utilities is not on, the inspector would have to reschedule, and there's a high likelihood that he's going to charge more money to come back because he just lost that 2, 3, 4 hour block of time that he had reserved for you, and now he can't do his inspection. Speaking of utilities, real estate agents sometimes make a terrible mistake of connecting the utilities in their own name. Sometimes real estate agents are working a transaction where the property is vacant. Maybe the sellers have moved out, they've disconnected some of the utilities, and the sellers are no longer emotionally invested in the property. They don't want to pay to turn those utilities back on. Well, it might be difficult for the buyer to turn them on since the property is not in his name, or justifiably so, the buyer might not want to turn the utilities on in his own name. After all, the purchase and sale agreement does state clearly that the seller is responsible for keeping all utilities on throughout the process and through the moment of close of escrow. But what happens if that's not the case? What happens if the seller has disconnected and the buyer does not connect those utilities? Some real estate agents feel, hey, we could lose the whole transaction over this situation. We can't do a proper inspection. Maybe the landscaping is dying. We've got to get these utilities on. And some real estate agents are tempted to put the utilities on in their own name. It is a monster mistake. It is fraught with liability. And real estate agents should never do that. I was talking to Will Mitchell, who is the boss over there at Home Pride Inspections, in preparation for today's video. And I asked him, is there any particular piece of information that you'd like me to impart to my viewers? And he said, yes. I want you to talk about how important it is to conduct a mold inspection if you discover that the electricity had been turned off on the property at some point. Because if the electricity has been turned off, mold is a lot more likely to grow and grow quickly on that property. So as a real estate agent, not only should you always encourage your buyer to do a home inspection, always, but in the case where you gain knowledge that the electricity has been turned off at some point, it is even more critical for that buyer to do a home inspection. Here's something I want to talk about when it comes to reading and interpreting that inspection report. Often, when you read an inspection report, you see issues about caulking. We probably all know what caulking is, right? Basically, we can go to Home Depot or Lowe's, we can get a tube of caulking for a few dollars. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. You squeeze the caulking where the bathtub meets the wall, where the sink meets the wall, around the shower pan, those kinds of places you put caulking. And often, when you see in an inspection report that caulking is missing, or the caulking is old or cracked, that sort of thing, people think, oh, caulking, I can get a tube of caulking for $6. I can take care of this in 20 minutes by myself. Well, that's probably true, but caulking issues in an inspection report should give you a major red flag. After all, what is caulking used for, right? Caulking is used as a way to prevent water from getting behind the sink, behind the shower, behind the bathtub. And if the caulking is missing, or if the caulking is cracked and dry, that could mean that there has been some water seepage. And when we think of water seepage going into those dark and difficult to access places, we should be thinking mold. So, my advice to you, as simple and as innocuous as caulking can seem on an inspection report, it should trigger, in my opinion, the necessity to conduct a mold inspection as well. This is why I'm going to say in my Class 5 videos, where we do the purchase and sale agreement in great detail, how important it is to always protect the buyer's right to do a mold inspection, even if nothing is visible to the naked eye. Next thing I want to talk about here is the termite inspection. Now, in southern Nevada, we don't have a huge termite problem. We do have some termites, but it's nothing like, let's say, the southeast part of the United States, as an example, where termites are extremely common on a property. I want you to remember that in the case of a buyer getting VA financing, a termite inspection is going to be mandatory. It cannot be waived anywhere in the United States. Of course, VA financing is national, and this is a rule that VA has with their financing. The termite inspection must be conducted as part of the transaction, and this is very important also, VA mandates that the termite inspection is paid by the seller. This is not something that is negotiable. The seller must pay for a termite inspection when the buyer is getting VA financing. Now, when it comes to the actual day and time of the inspection, real estate agents should not be following the inspector around the property. I do recommend that the real estate agent attend the inspection, or at the very least, show up at the property before the inspection has been completed. That way, if there's any issues, you can talk to the inspector. Maybe the inspector can point some things out to you. But you should not be following the inspector around the property, pointing things out. Stay out of it. The inspector did not help the real estate agent draft the contract. The real estate agent should not help the inspector draft his inspection report. I also want to talk about the differences between cosmetic deficiencies and material deficiencies. So when it comes to issues on a property, they fall into two categories. Cosmetic, meaning something that you don't like the way it looks, versus material, something is not working properly. Examples of cosmetic deficiencies could include things like a stain on the carpeting, perhaps a burn mark on the kitchen counter, perhaps scratch in the paint. Those things don't affect the functionality of the home. They might not look very attractive. We call those cosmetic deficiencies. Cosmetic deficiencies typically do not find their way into an inspection report. Inspectors deal with material deficiencies, things that are not working or things that are not working properly. Examples of material deficiencies would include a leak in the roof, a hot water heater that's no longer heating the water, maybe a faucet that doesn't turn off all the way, maybe a lock on a window that's broken, those sorts of things. So cosmetic versus material, the way something looks versus the way something actually works. And that brings me to talking about the concept of life expectancy. Now, there are some home inspection companies, not Home Pride, that will include the concept of life expectancy in their inspection reports. And my experience tells me that life expectancy in an inspection report is an easy way to kill a deal, because the inspection report will say something like this: a 22 cubic foot stainless steel refrigerator with a built-in water line and ice maker, expected lifespan 12 years, age of this unit 14 years. And when people read that, they say, oh my God, day one I'm going to have to go out and buy a new refrigerator. Well, they probably can't tell that for 7 years that refrigerator was not even plugged in and wasn't used, right? So life expectancy can be a deal killer, and I recommend that we avoid that in an inspection report. In my experience, it is not indicative of anything except it is a scary thing for a buyer. I want to talk about how we handle a bad inspection. And when I say bad inspection, I'm talking about an inspection report that has, a significant list of deficiencies, things that are wrong with the property. Because real estate agents spend a ton of time to bring in new customers, to go out and show properties, to write offers, to negotiate transactions, to open escrow. And then they get to the point of the inspection report and they let the deal fall apart too easily. And then they're all the way back to the beginning, and they have earned nothing for all of the time they've invested in this transaction. So I want to address this topic. This is a very, very easy way for your transaction to fall apart if you're not careful. Every house has problems, okay? Every person who's watching this video right now, if you had an inspection performed on your house today, there's going to be something or some things that pop up in that inspection report. Even new construction can have a lengthy list of items that appear on an inspection report. Problems discovered during the inspection it's actually a good thing, because those problems have been discovered. If we don't do an inspection, or if we hire an unprofessional inspection company, it doesn't mean those problems don't exist. It just means that they're not going to work their way into the inspection report. And that's much worse for the buyer. What we need to keep in mind is that when that inspection report comes in and it lists all of these things that are deficient on the property, the buyer doesn't own it yet. These problems don't belong to the buyer. They belong to the seller. So if you're a savvy real estate agent, this is an excellent time to go back to the negotiating table. And there's really 3 ways that we can approach deficiencies on a property. One, which is the way I like the least, and I don't recommend unless we have to do it, is to ask the seller to perform those repairs. Now, we're going to get into that a little more when we get into the purchase and sale agreement in Class 5. I'm going to show you how to deal with that in the contract. But that's one thing we can do. We can ask the seller to perform certain repairs prior to close of escrow, and then the buyer has the walkthrough opportunity right before close of escrow. He can go back, he can check out the repairs, he can bring the inspector with him to do that reinspection. Another way to deal with deficiencies, and this is what I would recommend in a cash transaction, is to go back to the negotiating table in an attempt to lower the price. So in a cash transaction, in lieu of doing those repairs, I recommend that we negotiate to lower the price. In a financed transaction, I recommend a different strategy. I recommend that we actually get credits at the time of close of escrow from the seller to the buyer. And that way, the buyer's going to have those funds available if he chooses to perform those repairs himself. Now, I talk about in a cash transaction, I recommend lowering the price as opposed to getting a credit. There's a reason I say that. The closing costs for the parties are based on the contract price, are based on that final sale price. So example, if we have a $200,000 home, and instead of doing repairs, the seller is going to give the buyer $5,000 at close of escrow. The parties are going to pay closing costs based on the $200,000 when they should have handled it differently. They should have simply reduced the price to $195,000, and then they would have paid closing costs based on the $5,000. So the $5,000 credit actually becomes more money for the buyer and less out of pocket for the seller if we adjust the purchase price rather than doing a credit. And again, that's in a cash transaction. In a finance transaction, we go the other way. We want to go ahead and get that credit. Because if all we did was adjust the sale price in a finance transaction, that savings, let's say that $5,000 that I just used in my example, would be spread over the life of the mortgage, 15 years, 30 years, whatever it happens to be. And the difference every month is going to be negligible for the buyer. So we have to understand these are seller responsibilities. The burden is on the seller. The buyer holds most of the cards in this renegotiation. The exception to what I'm talking about here is when the buyer has a certain type of mortgage or a certain lender that makes some of those repairs what we call funding conditions. As an example, if you've got a buyer buying a property and the air conditioner is not working at all, that can be a real problem in Las Vegas in the summer, right? So if you're paying cash, you can go ahead and get a credit for that air conditioner. But if you're getting an FHA mortgage, chances are that air conditioner has to be functional at the time of close of escrow. So that might be an exception to the credit or adjusting the purchase price. That repair is probably going to be a funding condition, and there's probably no way around asking the seller to complete that repair prior to close of escrow. But be thankful that all of these problems were discovered on the seller's watch. They are seller's responsibility, and as real estate agents, we have to educate our buyers so they don't panic and cancel the transaction so easily. Another right that buyers have in a transaction that a lot of agents seem to forget about is the right to get estimates. So let's say we get an inspection report, and the inspection report shows, I don't know, let's say we have a crack in the master bathroom shower pan, and we also have a roof truss that is coming loose. Do you have any idea what it costs to fix a roof truss? Do you have any idea what it costs to fix a crack in a marble shower pan? I certainly have no idea what those things would cost. So rather than arbitrarily asking the seller, hey, can you give us $2,000? Can you give us $7,500? Why don't you get an estimate so you know what you're talking about, so that you can negotiate from a position of strength? As long as we do the home inspection early enough in the due diligence period, the buyer has the right to get those estimates before renegotiating those deficiencies. So the inspection is a critical stage of our real estate transaction. A weak agent will lose the transaction. A savvy agent will know how to negotiate his or her way through the transaction, through the repair issues, and save that transaction. I also want to mention that we should avoid self-inspection. You're going to come across some buyers who purport to have knowledge or experience about construction, that sort of thing, and they're trying to save a few pennies and do the inspection themselves. What a mistake. You're buying a home that probably costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now you want to save a few $100s by not hiring a professional inspector and relying on some of your own knowledge. That's ridiculous. Let a professional home inspector who is current on construction and trends and issues that are going on today, not what happened 25 years ago across the country. Let that person come out, do a professional home inspection. They are licensed, they are insured, they are knowledgeable, and we should avoid self-inspection at all costs. And as I mentioned toward the beginning of this video, try to encourage every buyer, even new construction, if the builder will allow it, encourage every buyer to do a home inspection. I would like to thank you for watching this video. I hope it was informative for you. If you are licensed with another brokerage in Southern Nevada and would like to talk with me, please text me or visit our website. See you next time.